All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody, to a special Saturday show. This is the Black Brain Trust. Today is Saturday, September 1st, first of the month, first of Q4 of 2018. Today is a makeup day for our geopolitics that was supposed to be on Wednesday, but due to some scheduling conflicts, I was not able to get to the show, but we are going to do it today. As always, we're going to have a good show for you today. I'm pretty sure you all are going to learn a lot of things and take some things away from the show, as always, or at least I hope you do, as always. So, with that said, pretty sure people are going to come in a little later. Might as well get the show started. All right, our first article comes from nationalinterest.org. Title: Back in 2015, a French nuclear submarine did the unthinkable. It sunk a Navy aircraft carrier. Wow. In March 2015, one of the largest nuclear powered warships in the world was sunk by one of the smallest. Written by Kyle Mizokami. Provided Safir targeted Roosevelt and three of her escorts, it will have damage four ships, not sunk them. Although the distinction is less important when it comes to escorts, which might have been knocked out of action, with just one torpedo in her Roosevelt would have likely still been capable of air operations. In March 2015, one of the largest nuclear powered warships in the world was sunk by one of the smallest. The Sapphire, a French nuclear attack submarine, reportedly penetrated the defenses of the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt and scored simulated torpedo hits on her. The incident, originally reported by the French Navy, was later suppressed. On March 4th, 2015, the French Navy announced in a blog post that the submarine Sapphire has simulated stalking and killing the carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. Not only was the nuclear powered aircraft carrier simulated to sunk by an unknown number of her escorts, the post was later removed without comment from the blog. Here's what the world knows, according to the French Navy blog post, saved and reproduced by the RP Defense blog. The exercise between Safir and the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group took place before an operational deployment, according to the French Navy. The Carrier Strike Group included several Tycho Ticonderoga class guided missile cruisers and Airley Burke class destroyers and a Los Angeles class nuclear attack submarine. According to U.S. Naval Institute News, Carrier Strike Group 12, CSG 12, departed Naval Station Norfolk and Naval Station Mayport on March 5th for a Middle East deployment. CSG 12 included the carrier Roosevelt, the Ticonderoga class cruiser, USS Normandy, and Arleigh Burke class destroyers Winston S. Churchill, Forrest Sherman, and Farragut from Destroyer Squadron 2 provided escort. The blog post explained that the pre deployment exercise, which occurred off the coast of Florida, took place in two phases. The first phase involved the Sapphire integrated with U.S. Navy forces to locate enemy submarines and pass data on to other friendly anti submarine warfare assets. The enemy submarine, in this case, may have been the Los Angeles class nuclear submarine attachment in CSG 12. In the second phase of the exercise, the Sapphire switched sides and became part of the enemy force. The French nuclear submarine was teamed up with U.S. Navy P-3C Orion and P-8 Poseidons. Sapphire was to locate the Roosevelt and get into position to sink her. As the exercise scenario degenerated into a shooting war, Sapphire was given permission to attack. The submarine reportedly sank Roosevelt and most of its escorts. Wow. After the exercise was over, Sapphire's commander met with Rear Admiral Richard Butler, commanding officer of Carrier Strike Group 4, and Vice Admiral Nora Tyson, Deputy Commander, U.S. Fleet Forces Command. The French Navy's blog post was announced on Twitter on March 4th, but was quickly deleted. Several defense outlets picked up on the deletion, and the state-sponsored RT, Russia Today, crowd that a major vulnerability had allowed Sapphire to penetrate Roosevelt's screen. That was pure speculation, as the original French Navy post does not mention any such vulnerability. Nevertheless, the incident appears to have actually happened. The most likely explanation for the deletion of the blog post was that it was simply embarrassing to a major French ally. Sapphire is the second of six Ruby's class nuclear attack submarines built for the French Navy. Ruby is the first generation of French nuclear attack submarines, while the French Navy has had nuclear powered ballistic missile submarines since the mid 60s. French attack submarines were conventionally powered until the early 1980s. At 2,630 tons submerged and 241 feet long, the Ruby class may also be the smallest nuclear combatants ever put to sea. Each submarine crew, each submarine has a crew of just 70. Wow, that is small, and is driven by one K-48 pressure water reactor to a speed of 25 knots underwater. That sounds ancient. The Ruby subs each have four bow torpedo tubes equipped with F-17 Montu torpedoes and MM-3.9 Exocet anti-ship missiles. How did it's 2 pages? Okay. How did such a tiny submarine kill a ship almost 15 times larger than itself? First of all, we don't know the rules of engagement of the exercise. Were the Roosevelt's escorts using all of their anti-submarine warfare sensors? Was there any prohibition or curb on their use, or were any of them declared inoperative for the purpose of the exercise? Second, it's important to remember that sunk is in quotation marks for a reason. The French F-17 torpedo has a 551-pound HBX 3 high explosive warhead. It can also only fire a salvo of four torpedoes at a time due to having only four torpedo tubes. A 551-pound torpedo warhead will probably not sink a Ticonderoga or Burke class escort, and though it would undoubtedly damage, it would definitely not sink a Nimitz class supercarrier. Also, given a screen of four escort ships and Roosevelt's onboard anti submarine warfare helicopters, a single salvo of four torpedoes was all Sapphire was going to get before it was forced to withdraw. And page 2. All right, I believe. Okay. Provided Sapphire targeted Roosevelt and three of her escorts, it will have damaged four ships, not sunken them. Although the distinction is less important when it comes to the escorts, which might have been knocked out of action with just one torpedo, and her Roosevelt would have likely still been capable of air operations. The U.S. Navy's anti-submarine warfare skills have deteriorated greatly since the end of the Cold War, and particularly since 9/11. The emphasis on land wars has directed the Navy's energies and budget elsewhere. Still, as the Chinese Navy continues to grow and the Russian Navy is used more aggressively in the Mediterranean and Baltic Seas, impro, impro, excuse me, I can't spell some words tonight. Improving ASW is becoming a well-deserved priority. The sinking of the Theodore Roosevelt may have been a blow to pride, but it was also an important wake-up call. The next time a foreign submarine stalks a U.S. Navy carrier with nearly 6,000 people on board, it could be the real thing. All right. Now, of course, with the article, they do have sinks and quotation marks. That French submarine is very small. The U.S. Los Angeles class submarine. It says fast attack submarine. It's small, but it's huge compared to this French submarine. I think the Los Angeles class submarine is 360 some odd feet long, and this French submarine is 241 feet. So it's I'm guessing a half. It's a French submarine plus half, and that's not counting the circumference of it. Then you have the ballistic missile submarines, which are huge. But I understand what they're saying. This was an exercise. This was a combat exercise, and maybe not all of the um, what's the word I'm looking for? The escort group's power was on full display, since France is friendly. So I don't think the full capability of the squadron was on display, or else I highly doubt this French submarine would have been able to quote unquote place sink any or even damage any of these escorts. And also, I forgot what I was going to say. If this was a real thing, they wouldn't have gotten close. Even though I remember what I was going to say. Even though the Navy's anti-submarine warfare capabilities have deteriorated, still would have gotten closer. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. All right. So, hello. How's everybody doing? How you doing, Yada? How you doing, Jack Charles Complex? How's everybody doing? All right. So, my other co-host has stepped out, so we're going to keep the show going with our next article. Our next article comes from bbcnews.com. And another point on our previous article, I think it could have been France was maybe have done that to try to suck brownie points, saying, "Hey, yeah, we sunk a Nimitz class supercarrier." Just try to get to bolster up their navy capabilities. Because when you think of navy, French navy doesn't hold that fear in your heart like other navies, like the American Navy, the Russian Navy. That garners respect. But the French Navy, it doesn't. So I'm thinking maybe they've done that to try to get some respect to their navy by saying that. All right. Our next article comes from BBC.com. Title: Russia says 63,000 troops have seen combat in Syria. Wow. Written August 23rd. Article: Russia has revealed the extent of its military involvement in Syria's war. A defense ministry video said more than 63,000 Russian military personnel had received combat experience in the country since September 2015. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said at the end of last year that 48,000 personnel had been deployed. The video also said Russian Air Force had flown 39,000 sorties, destroying 121,466 terrorist targets and killing more than 86,000 militants. There was no mention of any Russian military or Syrian civilian casualties. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a UK-based monitoring group, says at least 7,928 civilians and 10,069 combatants have been killed in Russian airstrikes. The Defense Ministry video also said Russian forces had tested 231 types of weaponry in Syria, including aircraft, surface to air systems, and cruise missiles. Russian forces have played a key role in considering the position of their ally, Syrian President Bashar al Assad, over the past 3 years. The conflict has swung heavily in his favor, with rebel forces being touted in many parts of the country, most recently in the eastern Ghouta region near Damascus and in the southwestern provinces of Deraa and Quneitra. Pro-government forces are preparing to launch an assault on the last major rebel stronghold, the northwestern province of Idlib, where 2 million people live. Officials in Moscow have stressed that Russian airstrikes only target terrorists, but activists have said that they mainly hit mainstream rebel fighters and civilians. UN war crimes investigators have also said that Russian and Syrian government aircraft have bombed hospitals, schools, and markets, which are protected under international humanitarian law, but militaries have denied the allegations. The US-led multinational coalition battling the Islamic State ICE, ISIS group has said it has carried out 29,826 strikes in Syria and neighboring Iraq since August 2014. The coalition has assessed that at least 1,059 civilians have been unintentionally killed in the strikes. However, an organization that tracks allegations of civilian deaths, Air Wars, says between 6,500 and 10,000 civilians are likely to have died. All right, I understand what they're saying, what they're doing with this. If they can bring Russia up on war crimes, then they can possibly take Russia out of the Middle East, out of Syria. Um, it's 63,000 Russian military personnel have seen combat experience. That to me is a full blown war, not an altercation. That's a lot of people on one side seeing military conflict. That's a full blown war to me. Secondly, it said that the Russian Air Force has flown 39,000 sorties. There's a lot of flights, destroyed 121,466 terrorist targets, and killed more than 86,000 militants. Those numbers can tell me says that this is a full out war. This is not a skirmish. And also with these other numbers that these humanitarian groups are saying that civilians were being killed, schools, hospitals were being bombed. These same places that were supposed to be protected by international law. If this is true, and I'll say this, in war, everything is not perfect. There's going to be some casualties of war, but if they are actually bombing these on purpose, then they could be brought up on war crime charges and possibly forced out of Syria. And I'm thinking if they are forced out of Syria, then that Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, that takes away a key ally of his. Hello?
I'm just now jumping into this. I lost power on my internet, so I had to come back up. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, they had to send 63,000 troops into Syria because Russia and Syria have a long relationship. A lot of Russian soldiers back in the day married Syrian women and had these interracial, interethnic children. So a lot of Syrian a lot of Syrian men and women today can speak Russian fluently and Arabic fluently because they have that sort of relationship. So that tells you how entrenched Russia is and invested in into Syria that they are. So they have no intentions on backing out. So sending in that many personnel is only logical, and that's only 1/5 of their military. Um, the other piece is that the idea that that Russia is just bombing these facilities that have that are outside of the bounds of war is not entirely true. So what happens is with these terrorists is that they bring in you know they use the supermarkets and the churches and the other facilities as their staging grounds so that they cannot be bombed. But what happens is The Russians use electronic warfare capabilities and can spot, cell phone signals as well as two-way radio signals inside these facilities, and so they eliminate the facility if they know that the target is in there because they're not going to hit it for nothing, right? It's a waste of ammunition, a waste of a sortie.
Mm-hmm.
What they Russians have found is that underneath these facilities, the terrorists have been digging tunnels, tunnels the size of a vehicle that can drive down there. So,
Mm-hmm.
and the terrorists have been using these tunnels to run from one location to the other undetected on top of the ground so that the drones can't find them. But, their AWACS, the Russian AWACS have been finding these electronic signals pinging on the ground that these guys are using these facilities, digging underground and using it as bunkers to avoid being bombed. So that's why there's such a discrepancy in the article.
Okay. And I would agree with that. They know under international law they cannot bomb hospitals, schools, markets, or things of that nature. So it's logical that they will use those areas that they know you can't just bomb to try to commit some type of guerrilla warfare or strategic warfare. But no one is saying, hey, yeah, they bomb these things, but they only bombed them because the militants were in there. That is not getting through the everyday person that's listening to this. But like I said, in war, everything is imperfect. Things happen, and with that, the enemy is going to use these schools and hospitals or kindergartens or anything like that to get a leg up in conflict. How you doing, Jack? How you doing today?
I'm doing good, man.
You got any
Pretty
Hey, what's
much
going
points
on,
on
brother?
this?
what's going on, bro? Well, my to add to that is it kind of ties in with what's going on in Yemen. I did some research on that, and the UN conducted a investigation for us for war crimes, and the amount of deaths happening there for as children. They're bombing schools and certain things, and a lot of children dying each month. So I think what they do is, I think what that is. My point is to say what that is like. How are the UN going to decide and figure out if war crimes are being committed? Because what's going on in Yemen, they're saying that Saudi Arabia is bombing all these schools and killing all these children. There's actually um, evidence that they're doing that, right? But they're just saying like, hey, that's not us. That's the other side. That's not ours. I think they're called the Houthis. I think they're called, but it's them. It's not us. But so how they gonna figure out who's who's at fault? Because obviously people are dying, right? Civilians are dying. So how are they gonna figure that out?
Well, there's only one way to figure it out is that the Houthis don't have an air force.
Mm,
The Yemeni air force was actually taken out back in 2015 by the Saudis on their first strike. So they had MiG-29 fighter jets inside these hangars that were waiting to be used, and the Saudis came in and just bombed it and took out their air force almost within a week. So
mm,
we know that the Houthis don't have an air force. The Houthis are actually a family. It's basically a tribe. Um,
mm,
and Salara is the political organization. So the Houthis are back in Salara in the in the Sana'a region. And Sana'a is the main port that is the main area that they have a stronghold, but the Saudis can't penetrate because anybody who goes into Yemen and knows Yemeni history is that nobody ever goes into Yemen and wins a war. The Egyptians went into Yemen in 1979 and got slaughtered. They lost
mm.
30,000 men within a year, which is an embarrassment. Um, so what I'm saying is when it comes to who is this at this joint?
Um, they just dropped off.
How did I get the link? Um, Back to what I was saying was that it, Saudi Arabia paid off the United Nations a year or so ago to avoid um, basically being taken to to the Hague, which would be a criminal court, international criminal court. So
Mm.
in this regard, Saudi Arabia is making sure that they avoid being scrutinized and that everybody points the finger at the Houthi rebels. However, by international law, the Houthi rebels actually have a right to defend themselves on the ground, and
Mm.
these guys are not, they're not a pushover, so to speak. So they have the capabilities of taking out Saudi Arabia's air force, but Saudi Arabia and UAE have been the only ones bombing, Yemen from the air. So if we're gonna do a forensics exam or a forensics test on who's involved in the bombing of these facilities, the only finger you can point would be Saudi Arabia. However, Saudi
Mm.
Arabia is never going to stand trial for this, because they don't, Saudi Arabia's justification for going in is for intervention. The reality is that Yemen has gas and oil and quite possibly gold inside their waters, which is what Saudi Arabia is trying to avoid. Um, trying to avoid having to compete against Yemen for resources, because Saudi Arabia is a resource stronghold in terms of gas and oil with their company called Aramco. So
You know,
if
as far as the Aramco, man, I think I saw like an article that said they were going to sell, I guess, to start an IPO for their stock or whatever, and it was like, I think they priced it at 5% for, it was like $2.2 trillion. I'm like, what? But they backed out of it though, so it was like so it's pretty much always about resources. It's all mostly about resources, not about the people, just purely resources. And
well, keep in mind that if Yemen is able to extract the resources out of the ground, what that does to Saudi Arabia is it puts them out of business.
mm,
Same thing with the Emiratis. If Yemen can extract the resources out of the ground, these two countries are out of business, and if they're out of business from a economic standpoint, what that's going to do to them politically is going to cause an upheaval, because the people are going to not receive the little welfare benefits that they've been receiving all these time, keeping them pacified. So if these people say, well, I'm not going to get my paycheck today, or I'm not going to get my food stamps or whatever it is that they do out there, they're going to go right to the government and they're going to bring the monarchy right to their knees and try to overthrow.
Hmm.
And one more thing on Aramco. I'm not sure how this plays out, but I got from a very reliable person source that that whole thing with them going public was pretty much a strategic thing. They never really intended to, and they're not going to intend to go fully public, because when you do, you have to kind of disclose your books and what you have in your reserves, and they have like trillions of barrels of oil on reserves, to last for a millennia and a millennia. But they're never going to let it get that far to where they have to disclose that. So that was one of the reasons why they kind of, you know, that they won't go fully through with it. If somebody else knows more about that, how that plays out, they can go and comment. But that's what I heard. The reason why Aramco, they're kind of playing chess with this going public thing.
Yeah, and that's true. But you also have to factor in that oil won't be used as much in the next 100 years, so they're going to have to diversify their portfolio. And what they're trying to do right now is, especially with the arresting of all these princes and all these other people in the monarchy last year, when they put people on house arrest and they raided their houses and basically arrested all these people for corruption. That was MBS, which is Mohammed bin Salman, who is the prince and heir to the throne of Saudi Arabia, was cleaning house to make sure we get rid of anybody who can speak out and challenge our authority, as well as get rid of any leaks from Aramco going public. But the reality is, um, Saudi Arabia is running out of money. They spend almost $700 billion on weapons from UK, France, and America, and they can't afford to pay their bills. So they're in trouble. and especially if Yemen is able to extract the resources out of the ground, they're really in trouble. So they're on the wire right now. So they're doing whatever they can to survive. So this is survival mode for Saudi Arabia.
That makes sense because the way what I see what they're doing down there in Yemen, man, it's gruesome out there. Like what they're doing, I'm like, so it makes sense now. And I hearing that, it makes a lot of sense.
And to piggyback off a few things you said, Mike, that welfare system is supposed to be a cradle to grave welfare system, and they've been spending way more than they earn off their natural resources. And with MBS, also, I read in the article that we went over a couple weeks ago, what he's been doing is arresting relatives and seizing their assets so he can use that to cover the expenses of the government.
I know if you could pull up a map, that would be great too.
Okay, let me
Well,
pull it.
is that what I know? You guys have touched on, Venezuela quite a bit, but is that the same thing that Venezuela was doing? Kind of their outgo exceeded their income.
Not necessarily.
No, no, yeah.
There were sanctions put on Venezuela that actually hurt them. Although there were socialist policies that were also established under Chavez that were never properly balanced. So what Chavez did, he took the money from the oligarchs and actually redistributed it to the poor. And he lifted like 5 to 10 million people out of poverty between 1999 and 2005. So they kind of overspent themselves lifting people out of poverty, but it actually worked out for the better because it stabilized the country, politically speaking.
But then again, I know we have to move on. But then again, the question asked is to what end though? If you look at it right now, I could take a couple rolls of toilet paper and be wealthy there. So it's kind of like, was that like a temporary thing, or is that like a model that kind of works? Where did he mess up doing that? And I apologize if I'm getting a little bit off topic.
No, you're on topic.
Hmm.
Where they messed up was that they did not um they did not diversify their portfolio correctly. Um they don't process their own oil into gas. So they have some of the best oil in the world inside Venezuela. And so when people buy Venezuelan oil, they're buying that raw crude oil and then they go process it somewhere else. But in reality, what should be happening is that they should have invested into their own plants to for processing capabilities so that they could process the oil and then turn it into gas and then ship it all out.
And then since we're on
But they didn't. They didn't.
and since we're on the geopolitical, couldn't were there any potential geopolitical partners that they could have partnered with that could have fulfilled that need? Maybe not Cuba, but maybe China, Russia. Were there any other partners around that they could have brought in and align with to do that processing part of it?
There's been many discussions with other OPEC members, such as the most of the Muslim countries in the Middle East have invested into Venezuela in the last 6 months or so under the Petro. So there's been billions of dollars pumped into Venezuela. However, the United States has put sanctions on Venezuela so that they cannot get their money, get their dollars out of Wall Street and out of London and out of Brussels.
Okay.
So that becomes a problem.
Hmm.
So that's why you have a Petro now. So you got to give it, maybe a year, maybe 2 or 3 years before this can kick back in. But they're gonna rebalance at some point because their dollars obviously it deflated, right? Or I mean, there's inflation with their currency. However, a cryptocurrency will offset that. And we discussed this last night that Maduro actually wants his people to invest into gold. It's a safe investment. The currency is just written on a piece of paper doesn't really mean much at this point.
Hmm. And I brought up
Respect.
the
Thank you.
I brought the map of Saudi Arabia so people can look at the map and see these countries we're discussing. Jack, you mentioned the Houthis. They're in Yemen. This is Yemen on the southeastern part of, no, southwestern part of Saudi Arabia. The Emiratis, which is the UAE, they're to the west of Saudi Arabia. They they then you have Oman, Qatar. Bahrain, and so forth. So to give people a visual, I know talking about these places is good to talk about it and know about them, but also since it's a geopolitical show, see the map and then talk about them. That helps ingrain it more in your mind, and a lot of times that answers a lot of questions before you even answer them. So, any other points on that last article? All right, I think we're kicking off to a good start. All right, this next can you all still hear me?
We got you.
Okay, cool, cool. Our next article on the docket comes from Politico.com, titled "Russia Reestablishes Atlantic." Not Russia, I apologize. Navy reestablishes Atlantic Fleet to check Russia, written by Wesley Morgan, dated August 24th. Article: The U.S. Navy on Friday formally reactivated the Cold War era naval command it relied on for decades to confront adversaries in the waters off North America, the latest in a series of efforts to check Moscow's military expansion. The move comes as Russian submarine activity surges in the Atlantic. The Second Fleet in Norfolk, Virginia, which was deactivated in 2011, will once again be assigned ships, aircraft, and marine landing forces for potential operations along the East Coast and in the North Atlantic, where melting Arctic ice has been heightened. The has also heightened the competition for natural resources. We as a navy, as a nation, have not had to confront such peer competitors since the Cold War ended nearly 3 decades ago. One of the navies, the Cold War, didn't the Cold War end more than 3 decades ago?
1991.
Okay, all right. One of the Navy's top officers, Fleet Forces Command Chief Admiral Chris Grady, said during a ceremony in Norfolk aboard the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush. Our sea control and our power projection, two vital elements of our national security, are being challenged by resurgent foreign powers, namely Russia and China, he added. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral John Richardson, who issued the order earlier this year to reestablish the Second Fleet, stressed that the Navy is not looking for a fight, but he said realities demand that it maintain a large scale ocean maneuver warfare unit in the Atlantic region. Earlier this year, Richardson told reporters that Russian submarine activity in the Atlantic is more than we've seen in 25 years. The Second Fleet, according to the Navy, will exercise operational and administrative authorities over assigned ships, aircraft, and landing forces on the East Coast and the North Atlantic. It will also supply ships to other commands worldwide. The Navy also indicated it was reestablishing the fleet last spring, asserting it was needed to better respond to the changing security environment. That was an apparent reference to an aggressive Russian military buildup that led Defense Secretary Jim Mattis to issue a new national defense strategy in January. The strategy shifted the Pentagon from focusing primarily on counterterrorism to great power competition. This move is driven by Secretary Mattis, said retired Admiral Melvin Williams, who led the Second Fleet from 2008 to 2010. He came out with a defense strategy that shifted focus to major competitors. So, Second Fleet, as they come back, will be more involved in the basis of dealing with a major competitor, be it Russia or China. Whereas after 9/11, a lot of our emphasis was on dealing with terrorism and piracy and supporting operations in the Middle East, he added. That's that's the back in the future aspect of it. Indeed, while it will be much smaller in scale than its Cold War predecessor, the new Second Fleet will very much reflect its historic role. From its founding in 1950 through the end of the Cold War, Second Fleet was responsible for keeping tabs on Russian submarines and securing passage of Allied forces across the Atlantic in the event of war. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the fleet remained a substantial force. Williams recalled in an interview that he commanded on the order of 130 ships and submarines, including aircraft carriers and amphibious landing vehicles, and 90,000 sailors, Marines, and Navy civilians. But at least initially, the new fleet will be a shell of what it was. Vice Admiral Andrew Woody Lewis, who took command of the new headquarters Friday in Norfolk, said he and his staff will aggressively and quickly rebuild this command into an operational warfighting organization. But Lewis doesn't actually control any ships yet, nor many personnel. Navy spokeswoman Lieutenant Commander Ashley Hakiako called this outfit a lean headquarters and has yet to reach its planned manning level of 250. The fleet will immediately have oversight over assets until they reach initial and full operational capability at a future date to be determined, as they are being established using a phased approach, she said. Over time, ships from other units will be folded into the Second Fleet. Akiako added that the fleet's first high-end training is scheduled for early next year. The move is one of several the U.S. and its allies have made in recent months to beef up Navy and Air Forces in the Atlantic. Last month, the United Kingdom's Royal Navy announced plans to establish its own new headquarters with a similar role as Second Fleet, citing Russia's military resurgence. NATO formalized plans in June to establish a new Atlantic Command, which would bring together naval assets and the alliance of the same area's Second Fleet is charged with patrolling, and the Pentagon has offered Norfolk as a likely headquarters site. It's unclear what the relationship will be between the new U.S. fleet and the new NATO naval headquarters. But during the Cold War, Second Fleet played a key role in NATO's Atlantic Command structure, and with the Second Fleet commander also serving as the head of the Alliance Striking Fleet Atlantic. NATO's original Atlantic Command was disbanded in 2003, and Second Fleet gave up its NATO strike role in 2005. Now, a few points I want to point out to this. A few weeks ago, I think, no, a few months ago, we were seeing reports how the military could not even recruit enough people to fund its military, and how Trump was ramping up recruitment across all branches of the military. I don't think anything came out which explained why he was doing that. But to me, this with them expanding the fleet, adding another fleet, they need personnel to man that fleet. So they're going to have to recruit more and more people to put in that fleet, sailors and Marines. Also, I feel that this approach is multifaceted. Yes, Russia and China's naval operations and capabilities are building, but they also pointed out how the melting ice in the Arctic is revealing more and more natural resources. So I'm believing they're going to use their military to establish themselves in the Arctic to harness those natural resources, and also with the sea lanes where goods are transporting, they are also going to use their ships to protect those cargo ships. That's what I'm thinking. Are we still on?
Yes, sir. And you wouldn't be wrong for thinking that. Russia established a entire Arctic fleet military base about maybe a year and a half ago. It's in full functioning form now, and ready for any sort of confrontation. The capabilities that it has, it's already nuclear capable. So um, they basically control a great portion of the North Pole and um, many of the lanes up there that are behind Canada. Even the Canadians couldn't challenge them on this, and the Canadians would have um, no parts of a confrontation with them because that could be a disaster for them, and I don't think they're willing to risk um, a confrontation with Russia over some water that they themselves don't have any assets in, so to speak. You know, Russia has the best icebreakers in the world, um,
Mm.
bar none, and they can get through any sort of terrain in the north if they have to, and they have, which is how they're able to establish themselves up there. However, I foresee, based on this article, what it sounds to me like the United States is banking on the idea of a confrontation happening in the Atlantic. That if they get pushed out of Africa and they get pushed out the Middle East and they get pushed out the Pacific, you know, the final battleground would be in the Atlantic.
So they're almost wishing for something to happen to give them a reason to go to war with either Russia, or namely Russia in this case, and to get back into the Middle East and to get back into Africa because Russia is in the Middle East, namely Syria, and they just signed that deal with CAR, Central African Republic. So that would give them a reason to go back into those territories and continent.
Well, not just Russia, but actually China. China has they ramped up heavily in the last 18 months. They've launched 34 warships in the last 18 months.
Wow,
You know, which is impeccable. That means
it
that
is.
China China is not um, China's not doing this because they have excess labor. They're doing this because they have to. They know that there's going to be a confrontation between themselves and the United States and quite possibly NATO. So they're ramping up as much as possible to make sure that their sea lift capabilities are there. Russia doesn't have any sea lift capabilities, so to speak, which is why they have such a hard time in Syria.
Mm.
Um, they don't have the ability to to deliver payloads of goods because they don't have enough landing ships, and they would not be the threat in the Atlantic. It would actually be China because China has some pretty fast corvettes, frigates, destroyers, um, new new um, new submarines that are almost 1.5 times faster than anything that the Americans have, and all of these warships also carry nuclear capabilities. So uh, United States is banking on a confrontation in the Atlantic and maybe even a surrender.
Okay, now two things one thing I want to mention and another thing I want to ask you. Um, to people that don't know why Russia has the best icebreakers in the world when it comes to submarines and their ships, well, let's look at the map as we talk about this. Due to where Russia is situated, which is near the Arctic, a lot of their naval ports freeze up over the wintertime. And the only warm water ports they have, we spoke about this a while ago, is Crimea, right? That's Russia. That's only Russia's only warm water naval port is in Crimea.
Where's Crimea on that map?
Crimea,
It's in below the Ukraine.
yeah,
Thank
is
you.
this little sliver
If you zoom
of
in on it'll show it.
yeah on the is losing on the Black Sea. Let's get over here. The Ukraine is right here, but you see these dotted lines where my mouse is hovering at. This
Hmm.
area right here is Crimea, and this is Russia's only warm water naval port.
Is that landlocked? I can see the bottom. It looks like it's locked.
You have Turkey, and you have the city of Istanbul that separates the Black Sea from the Mediterranean. So yeah, it's in the Black Sea, but that's Russia's only warm water port. All the
Okay.
others, they're warm water parts of the year, but they freeze over in the winter months. So they have to have those capabilities to break up all that ice. That's why they have the best icebreakers in the business. Now, Mike, I want to ask you. You said that um, China would be a major player in the Atlantic. Let's zoom out a little bit in the Atlantic Sea. Oh, it's too much. I apologize, people. How how will China be a power in the Atlantic Sea when it's on the eastern side of America and China is facing the western side of America?
They have they have they're establishing new ports. So there's a they've established a new port inside I believe it's Uruguay, if I remember correctly, um, in the last 9 months. So I think Uruguay is actually a naval port for China now, and it's a high probability that they'll use Jamaica as a naval port as well to keep America in check. I think the United States military knows this, and they're using they're using this as a justification to revamp themselves inside the Atlantic because nobody has been in the Atlantic, for the last 35 to 40 years. So, for all intents and purposes, they had to dismantle their brigades.
Okay.
There was really no need for that strong of a military in a place that has no action. So, and they focused their efforts on the Middle East. But South Africa is another player um, that would allow China to have access to their ports. And South Africa has a lot of ports that that the Chinese and the Russians have been wanting to put stake in. And then you factor in Cape Verde. Cape Verde is forward facing to the United States, so
Hmm.
there's possibilities all around that would push the United States out of that region. We know that maybe 2015 there were war games being played in the Atlantic with the Chinese frigates practicing capabilities of counterinsurgents of these warships of possibly taking down the United States or any other country that was going to confront them in the Atlantic. So
Now, for people who don't know where Uruguay is, it's in South America. This is where Uruguay is. It's below Brazil and to the east of Argentina. It's too much of a zoom. So that's what Uruguay is. Cape Verde is off the coast of Senegal, which are these islands right in here. These dotted islands right there. That's Cape Verde. And Jamaica, if you don't know where Jamaica is right under Cuba, right under Cuba, south of Cuba, and west of Haiti.
If I were to ask, like, what side are folks on in this, in these aggression games? They won't stop. They will continue. People will be jockeying for a position in this sea and that sea, on this land and that land. I mean, where do we stand as um us? And I won't go ahead and put a label to it, and how all this stuff plays out. You know what I'm saying? Like, which side are we on?
are you referring to black people?
Correct. Black men.
Black black people will probably be more on the side of the bricks for what is for which it stands. And the
Really?
reason I say that is because yes, there's a lot of black people. Russia, Putin some months ago had already stated that any Africans, and this would include African Americans, who want to do business with Russia, Russia is open for business, right? So $30 billion, yeah, I think it's like $30 billion of partnership that they're offering. Maybe that might be in rubles, maybe not in dollars. But the point of the matter is, Russia says that they're open for business and they're welcoming um,
How much?
anybody from Africa. It's up to $30 billion.
Yeah, billion would it be? Bravo.
But I mean, how much does
And
the U.S. How much does the U.S. give away every year of that in welfare to black folks?
In America?
welfare is
Yes.
different, right? So welfare is public policy, right? So you're not able to take welfare dollars and turn it into something more tangible, like a new startup business. We're not seeing that. and that's a part of the whole entire social equity programs that Black people need to be focused on, and some of the stuff that I focus on the ground. And maybe Ulysses can actually chime in on something like this when he gets on. But this is the stuff that we should be focusing on, is the tangibles. But with welfare is not a tangible for business and entrepreneurship. It's just more of a public policy to keep people from starving to death, right? So it's more about survival. So when it comes to doing business with the East, we have to keep in mind that they've been very welcoming to Black people doing business with them, whereas in the United States, you don't really see too much of this happening because public policy has kept a lot of Black men from actually having access to micro loans and macro loans. We know that some years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, there was a article that came out that talked about the reason why they don't lend to Black men is because Black men don't are least likely to pay back their bills because of their inability to pay child support, something to that effect, and that the loans were going to Black women. And that's why you see a lot of Black women having these startup businesses and hair care and things like that. But my point in saying all this is that it will behoove us as Black men to actually venture out and see what else is available, rather than to keep spinning our wheels talking to the same people who don't like us.
I mean, yeah, I mean, on that, I totally agree. But to the point of trading out, one devil for the next devil, someone who's unknown, and he's only throwing trinkets to those who are in a position to go ahead and do business with him. So he's not gonna throw bread or shecklings at the broader community. It's just those who are in position to go ahead and do business with him. And those people who might be in position may go and take that dollars or take that money and do it and spend it globally. It won't come back to the Black community. Now, I'm not gonna go ahead and portray myself as someone that's for the community, because I'm really not. But I'm just saying, this trade, what's that old school saying? The enemy or the devil I know is better than the devil that I don't know. Something like that.
Something like that.
So now, I don't know if he jumped off or not. It would be it would be a business move instead of getting into bed with Russia and say, "Oh, Russia like Black people." It will be strictly a strategic business move in terms of, all right, we know we can't build here in America the way we want to on a wider scale. Yes, individual people can, and smaller groups can, but on a wider scale, we know we have been doing that. So it would be more of a strategic business move with Russia in order to build what we need. And it'll be those who are ready to do it.
Eh.
You need allies. You can't, in this world today, you need allies, and the strategic allies.
Well, keep in mind that it was the Russians who actually facilitated a lot of the liberation in Africa. Lumumba was actually supported by the Russians. So what I'm saying here is that it's not as if this is unfounded truth or evidence. There's actually substantial evidence that proves that there are other allies around the world who do have our best interests, and if we are organized enough as Black men, we could actually partake in these in this international chessboard. And the question that you have is, where do we stand, right? Where do we stand geopolitically speaking? We really don't stand anywhere because we haven't organized ourselves to do so. And part of the reason why we have the Black Brain Trust is because we need to organize on the fourth industrial revolution and how it pertains to us and how we're going to benefit from it and actually take advantage of the opportunities that come from it. And working with international partners is actually going to be the opportunities for us to actually partake in it.
Yes.
What's going on, Copley?
What's going on?
Good evening, gentlemen. What's going on?
Good. Now, Mike, what was the phrase you said when we first started this, um, you only have permanent interests, but limited friends.
Yeah, your interests are permanent and your friends are temporary.
Temporary, yeah.
So that's what we're talking about. We're not saying having permanent friends. We're talking about being holding to our interests first.
We got to have interests. That's the first thing.
Yeah, and again, for the sake of moving things along, I'll just leave it to the devil I know is a whole lot better than the devil I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
In my
Preem,
personal,
what was the question again? That's I wanted to try to get in on the question that you had asked. What was the question? How you had worded it?
pretty much it had to do with you know, like, is it really in where do we stand? You know what I'm saying? As black men, if we have someone courting us over there and saying, "Hey, look, if you guys side with us, we're gonna give you this and that and whatever," and what we
Mm-hmm.
already have that's established, that may not be the best thing. You know, where do we go ahead and put our interests at? And I'm not risk adverse. I'm the last person. Anybody who knows me, I'm the last person to be risk adverse. But it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like I know about people throwing trinkets out and they can switch up the game at any time. And if someone is truly is sincere, I just kind of fall back, be like, okay, I'm not gonna look at what you're telling me that you're going to go ahead and do. I'm not gonna look at the token stuff that you're doing now. Let me get behind the curtain and see some stuff that has been going on or that you have done. Because like for instance, if we look at the whole Africa thing, and I'm not one to go ahead and speak in the detail about this country or that country, but
Mm-hmm.
pretty much if you have a pond there and you say, okay, this pond is over here with this guy or with this country, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw him some cake, throw him some candy to bring him over here.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean like they're doing that because they really want to uplift that pond or do something good for that pond. They're doing that so they can take that pond from over on the side of their enemy,
Right.
if that makes sense.
No, it does. I'll kind of relay like how I view it, right? In order to answer, because I think the question, and it's a really good question, right? And it's a subjective one, right? So that means that depending on the person answering it and how they kind of view the world, they're going to give you a different answer. I'll give you an answer from somebody who looks at things from a global perspective, right? Um, First, you determine what your interests are. Like, what is it that you want out? What is it that you want out of the deal, right? And you view it objectively. China might give you the best deal on certain things, but there may be a European country that might be giving you a sweeter deal somewhere else.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's not necessarily in your interest to be beholden to, say, one side or the other.
Right.
You play
You're
both. You
beholden
play
to your
both sides to
interests.
your benefit.
You're beholden to your interests.
Yes, exactly. Now, to answer your question more succinctly, what are black men's interests? I know what mine are, and I know the brain trust. They know we know what ours is, but to ask the question largely, what are black men's interests? If we can answer that
Okay,
question,
so I mean,
then yeah.
I mean, just for me, my whole view on this whole thing is, I just view it as being um a loose confederacy of individuals. You know what I'm saying? I respect people's individual right. I'm an individualist, and I
Mm-hmm.
subscribe to the whole Voltron theory. I don't see a whole community as one cohesive, monolithic thought, group thought thing. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? So everybody has their own, but
But you have to be on the same
but
page if you deal with these international things.
Well, I was gonna say I think where because of the nature of what it is that we're talking about, we can only be dealing with business. I don't think we could really be dealing with anything else. You know what I mean? As far as like the kind of common thread that would sort of tie everyone in as a block with regards to going to the negotiating table with either governments or other business groups in other countries. Now, I can relay, some of the experiences that Noah and I have had, with regards to trying to establish, some sort of trade links in various African nations. They've told us specifically, and we've put the call out numerous times in these hangouts. They tell us, okay, well, you come as a group,
Yes.
right? Come as a group of brothers with businesses and different services, products, and what have you. Come as a group, and we got you. You want we can talk. We could talk citizenship. We can we can talk all this stuff, right? There's power in numbers.
And to input one thing, we're not saying everybody think the same way, speak the same way, eat the same way, dress the same way, but you have to be on the same page.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll go ahead and say this one last thing in the interest of the show to go ahead and move it along. To your point, yeah, I mean, you have countries that business is free and open. You can do business with countries, Africa, whatever, that pose no military or strength or domineering threat to the U.S. You can do business with those that do. But when it comes down to it, we have to be thoughtful to where, are these guys giving us a carrot, just so they can advance something to go ahead and take over that whole military thing? You know what I'm saying? So again, you have countries like Africa, you have Latin America, you have plenty of places to where we can go ahead and do business with countries that aren't jockeying in this sea, in that sea, on this land and that land, with this squad or this force, jockeying for, messing with this oil or this or this or this or this commodity. When it gets to that, we should fall back and be like, okay, the business and the money thing is good, but what's the bigger picture that these guys are pushing for? Because to them, 50 billion may be chump change to them. You know what I'm saying? They may throw out 50 billion, maybe chump change to them if they can get and play this bigger game, if they can lock this bigger thing down. Africa doesn't have that. Latin America doesn't have that. Russia has that. China has that. And again, I'm not adverse to doing business with them, but I'm just saying, what is their end game? And we should take that into mind, in this whole grand scheme of doing business with them.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lionel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. You have to be smart and strategic and say, well, we know what we want. Let's try to see what they want and what they're not telling us. And if we are endangering of giving them the whole cake, yes, we agree with that, but you still have to be holding to your interests. Right. And I'm not saying be holding to your interests and go with Russia. No, be holding to your interests, and whoever gives you the best shots of fulfilling your interests, yes, do that. But also be mindful that, okay, what could this other person be getting out of the deal, and can it come back and bite us in the butt?
That circles back to, what was the saying that you talked about, Preem? What was that saying? That
the enemy that I don't know is better than the enemy that I do know. Something like that.
The devil that I know is better than the devil that I don't.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we have to understand that what you see happening to black men in the United States is because we lack political representation, and unless we're going to organize ourselves to get that political representation, we're going to have to find partners outside of the United States. So beyond business, we're going to need international allies from a political standpoint. And you get 100 black men with suit and ties that walk into Moscow and say, I'm ready to do business with you. That's a political move. Everything that you do is political. Who you have sex with is political. Who you marry is political. These are all geopolitical moves, and we have to figure out where we stand geopolitically on the grand chessboard. If we can't figure out that, then we're kind of screwed, because we cannot align ourselves with these same entities that are oppressing us. That's impossible. So what I'm saying here is you got in LA, I think Black Gnostics had spoke about this the other day, that there was something like up to 200,000 gangbangers in LA. If you organize all those men, that's a military.
That's a big military.
Oh yeah, Plex. I apologize. I didn't answer your question. I stepped off and couldn't unmute.
No, you good,
But
bro. You good.
But again, I'll say this one last thing. But I mean, if if it's possible, if it can happen, God bless it. But
It happens every day.
but I just again, the devil I know is
Okay,
better than the
listen,
devil I
Preem,
don't know. And
it
yes,
happens
sir.
every day. It's just that in this case, it's black men doing it. It's black Americans doing it.
Right.
That's your hang up. It's happening every day. The articles that we're talking about, it's happening every day. It's just your hang up
Exactly.
is because it's black men doing it. That's what it is.
And as soon as we can as soon as we can determine a clear cut goal and objective, and and from my experience, this happens a lot easier in smaller groups, and we can obviously, and Preem, I trust me on this. I know where you're coming from. Believe me, bro. I know where you're coming from, right? But follow what I'm about to tell you. This is the reason why, with regards to brothers, black men, bro, it works in smaller, concentrated numbers. I'll tell you right now. There's certain countries in Africa they would like to have like a contingency of maybe say like 100 brothers, right? Like I said, uh, lawyers, businessmen, tradespeople, craftsmen, people like have like doctors, medical skills. You put that together, and then we go to them as a block. Okay, you'll trust me on this. The reception that you get is a whole lot different than, say, if it was like 5 of us.
Again,
Okay, and the 5 of us go there, and we talk about trying to do something, right? So back here, we have to make a decision, right, or make a determination that.
exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Again, and this will be my last thing. But again,
Sure, go ahead.
there's nothing holding this back from countries or continents like Africa or Latin America or wherever else where they don't have a military or strength or an aggressive strategic outcome embedded in their agenda, whatever. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying don't do it. I mean, it's getting done. It's been getting done. Other cats are doing it. I may not be doing it, but I respect the game. But I'm saying when it comes to folks who also have another motive, who are also jockeying for position, the best offense is a good defense, and we can't just.
This is why we do what's beneficial to our interests. You keep your options open, right? We listen to other potential partners. That's what I mean. It's a mindset that we have to adopt. This is real. It falls on us, bro. Like real shit.
Okay. Look. I mean, so I mean, if I was to go ahead and just break this down to like a basic elemental A, B, C level, I would say, okay, where does a black man? If I was to look at these other countries, let me just pick two of them: China, Russia. If I was to say, where does the black man stand? The average black man stand in these countries now today, who doesn't have who does not have a business interest or anything. If he was to go there, would he be welcome? Would he be in? Would everything be okay? Would it be this? I'm not saying they're hanging them up by their upside down by their toenails and cutting off their genitalia. But just how are they treating the average black that's a businessman who has something that they want, or who has carrots that they're dangling in front of him?
No. We're not going to Russia or China to live.
I know, but
okay. I follow.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I'm saying how are they dealing with cats now?
Let me answer that question, Lionel.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's a simple answer to that one. Okay, there's a website called Alibaba, right? You can go there. Basically, you have access to the basically the entire Chinese industrial base. Okay. Let me ask you something. As a black man, when has this country ever given you free and open access to that?
I ordered stuff from Alibaba like 6 years ago, I believe. So it was like
That's what I'm saying is that Alibaba, they're this is how welcoming they are to you. They are to you. It's a very pragmatic approach, right? It's not necessarily a personal thing. It's an open thing because opening what it is that they have the ability to do, opening it up to you is
okay.
benefit. It's been not only is it beneficial to you, but it's beneficial to them, right? It's very pragmatic. It's not a personal thing, right? It's not necessarily well, how do they view me personally? Well, they don't really care about you
Believe that.
personally.
Believe that if you want to.
Okay,
Believe that. Believe that.
you
If you, if you know, go ahead, Mike. I apologize.
no, you putting
I'm done
feelings
now.
in
I
this.
wasn't gonna interrupt you. What I was gonna say was let's return back to this on open mic, and then
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
let's
Okay.
get through these articles first.
Okay.
All right, let's let me open up my screen. Go to the next article on the docket. All right, this one comes from Reuters.com. Title: Russia says sees signs U.S. preparing for possible strike on Syria agencies. Written August 27th. All right, article: Moscow, the Russian Military of Defense said on Monday it has noticed Washington was building up its military forces in the Middle East in preparation for what Moscow feared was a possible strike on Syrian government forces, Russian news agencies reported. Major General Igor Konashenkov was quoted by agencies as saying that the USS Ross, a guided missile destroyer, has entered the Mediterranean on August 25th, armed with 28 Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of hitting any target in Syria. That's the end of the article. Mike, what about this article made you want to put this on a docket for tonight?
There's a high probability that the terrorists that were being moved out of southern Syria are been moved to Idlib. Idlib is in the north. This is the final stronghold for ISIS in the north. So there's probably about an estimate anywhere between 10 and 20,000 terrorists still laying low inside Idlib. These are all personnel that are actually being supported by the United States. These terrorists. So what the Syrian government wants to do is go in there and just level the place out completely. What the United States wants to do is prevent the Syrian government from doing it by staging a chemical attack so that they can justify going in there. Last week we heard Trump say that if there's any sort of chemical weapons being moved around or spilled or any sort of intervention using chemical weapons, United States, France, and Britain reserves the right to go in there and level out Assad.
Where have we heard that one
First of
before?
all, yeah, it was some guy from Chicago said it. First of all, Bashar al-Assad is not going to use chemical weapons. He doesn't need to. You don't need to use chemical weapons against 20,000 people in a small pocket of the country. It's actually their agricultural industrial center for what it stands for. That's their Midwest, so to speak, right? That's where they grow their corn and their crops and things of that nature. It's where they get all their agricultural resources from. So the terrorists know that, and what they're doing is they're trying to take advantage of the area for what it is and use it as cover. Syrian government is ramping up right now as we speak to actually liberate that area, and the United States is saying no, we don't. We're not going to let you do that. So we're going to stage all our our B-1 bombers and our F-22 Raptors and get them ready to go in there and basically take out the Syrian military if we think that they're using chemical weapons, and the Russians are saying no. If you decide to go in there, then we'll respond to any other external threat. So this could be the clashing of heads between Moscow and Washington D.C. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Okay. Any other points? Any other quick points?
No, I think that was pretty succinct.
All right. Let's get to our next item on the docket tonight. This one is from also this also is from Reuters.com. Title: Russia to hold its biggest war games since fall of Soviet Union. These last two articles start and tie in together. This one is written by Andrew Osborne, dated August 28th. Article: Moscow. Russia will next month hold its biggest war games since the fall of the Soviet Union, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said on Tuesday. A massive military exercise that will also involve the Chinese and Mongolian armies. The exercise, called Vostok 2018 East 2018, will take place in central and eastern Russian military districts and involve almost 300,000 troops, more than the 1,000 military aircraft, two of Russia's naval fleets, and all of its airborne units, Shoigu said in a statement. But the maneuvers will take place at a time of heightened tensions between the West and Russia, which is concerned about what it says is an unjustified buildup of the NATO military alliance on its western flank. NATO says it has beefed up its forces in Eastern Europe to deter potential Russian military action after Moscow annexed Ukraine's Crimea in 2014 and backed a pro Russian uprising in eastern Ukraine. The War Games, which will take place from September 11th to 15th, are likely to worry Japan, which has already complained about a Russian military buildup in the Far East, something Moscow has linked to Tokyo's rollout of the Aegis U.S. missile system. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is due to attend a forum in the Russian city of Vladivostok over the same period, and a Japanese foreign minister official said on Tuesday that Tokyo always paid attention to shifts in Russian China military cooperation. Shoigu said the war games will be the biggest since a Soviet military exercise, Zapad 81 or West 81 in 1981. In some ways, they will repeat aspects of Zapad 81, but in other ways, the scale will be bigger, Shoigu told reporters while visiting the Russian region of Kazakhstan, excuse me, of Kaz, Kaz, excuse me, Kasasia. Shoigu said that both military Pacific and Northern fleets would take part, while the Russian Ministry of Defense has said that Chinese and Mongolian military units will also participate. And more assertive Russia asked if the cost of holding such a massive military exercise was justified at a time when Russia is faced with higher social spending demands. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said such war games were essential. The country's ability to defend itself in the current international situation, which is often aggressive and unfriendly towards our country, means the exercise is justified, Peskov told reporters on a conference call. When asked if China's involvement meant Moscow and Beijing were moving towards an alliance, Peskov said it showed that the two were cooperating in all areas. China and Russia have taken part in joint military drills before, but not on a large scale. NATO spokesman Dylan White said that Russia has briefed the alliance on the planned exercise in May and that NATO will monitor it. Russia has invited military attaches from NATO countries based in Moscow to observe the war games, an offer he said was under consideration. All nations have the right to exercise their armed forces, but it is essential that this is done in a transparent and predictable manner, White said in an email statement. Vostok demonstrates Russia's focus on exercising large-scale conflict. It fits into a pattern we have seen over some time, a more assertive Russia, significantly increasing its defense budget and its military presence. Shoigu this month announced the start of a snap combat readiness checks in central and eastern military districts ahead of the planned exercise. Imagine 36,000 armored vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and armored infantry vehicles moving and working simultaneously, and that all this naturally is being tested in conditions all close as possible to military ones, Shoigu said on Tuesday. All right, who won first comments on this article here? Russia to hold its biggest war game since fall of Soviet Union.
They're getting ready to take the Pacific. That's what this is about.
Ooh, boy. Go ahead, Mike.
They've been planning this stuff out for quite some time, since the United States has extended its borders from California all the way into Japan, into basically the Japanese Sea. And for what it stands, China and Russia do not sit. That doesn't sit well with them, politically speaking, because if the last time the United States cut off resources and cut off sea lanes in the Pacific was World War II. The Japanese could not get their oil because the U.S. had put sanctions on Japan, and that's when Japan came back and bombed Pearl Harbor. So that's what initiated World War II for the Japanese and the Americans. So it's important to understand that the Russians and the Chinese are not going to sit idly and let the United States control half of the world, from Washington D.C., across bodies of water that are nowhere near their borders, specifically speaking. So the whole entire Pacific Ocean is actually being artificially drawn by military powers, and that doesn't sit well with these guys. So they have intentions on pushing the United States back from Guam all the way back to Hawaii, if need so, and if not further back into California. And we just read an article, I think, or Lionel just read an article for us that was said the United States plans on resurrecting the Second Fleet in the Atlantic. All of this is all coming together. That basically says that the United States is planning for a big showdown in the next maybe 5 to 10 years.
Interesting.
Exactly, it is. It is.
Yep.
Any other points and short comments on this one? All right, let's move on to our next topic on the docket. This next topic comes from BBC.UK. Theresa May pledges Africa investment boost after Brexit, written August 28th. Theresa May has announced plans to boost Britain's investment in Africa after Brexit during her first trip to the continent as Prime Minister. In a speech in Cape Town, she pledged £4 billion in support for African economies to create jobs for young people. She also pledged a fundamental shift in aid spending to focus on long-term economic and security challenges rather than short-term poverty reduction. She will also visit Nigeria and Kenya during the 3-day trade mission. On her way to South Africa, the Prime Minister played down warnings from the Chancellor about the economic damage a no-deal Brexit could cause. Talking to journalists on board Ralph Voyager on Tuesday morning, Mrs. May reiterated that she believed a no-deal Brexit was still better than a bad deal, adding no deal wouldn't be the end of the world. Last week, Chancellor Philip Hammond warned in a letter that a no-deal Brexit could damage the economy. Mrs. May's trip, which will see her meet the presidents of all three countries, aims to deepen economic and trade ties with growing African economies ahead of Britain leaving the EU in 2019. Arriving in South Africa on Tuesday morning, Mrs. May said she wanted the UK to overtake the US to become the G7's biggest investor in Africa by 2022. She promised to continue existing economic links based on the UK's EU membership, including an EU-wide partnership with the Southern African Customs Union and Mozambique after Brexit next year, promising an extra £4 billion in direct UK government investment, she which she expects to be matched by private sector. She said while the UK could not match the economic might of some foreign investors, such as China or the US, it offered long term opportunities to the highest quality and breadth. She defended the UK's aid spending in Africa, a target of criticism from some Tory MPs, saying it had worked to give millions of children and women an education and immunize millions against deadly diseases. But she said she was unashamed that it had to work in the UK's own interests and pledged a new approach in future, focusing on helping British private sector companies invest in fast-growing countries like Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal, while bolstering states under threat from Islamist extremism such as Chad, Mali, and Niger. True partnerships are not about one party doing unto another, but states, governments, businesses, and individuals working together in a responsible way to achieve common goals, she said. The UK's overseas aid budget totaled £13.9 billion in 2017, an increase of £555 million in 2016. UK direct investment in Africa was £42.7 billion in 2016, compared to £44.3 billion from the US, from the US, £38 billion from France, and £31 billion from China, according to data from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Teresa, is this? No, no, no. I apologize. That's another article. All right. So this article, I'll read the title again. Theresa May pledges Africa investment boost after Brexit. My thinking behind this is, again, no matter what the deal is, no deal, a deal, or a bad deal, no matter what it is, um, what they're doing is positioning themselves after what happens in 2019 concerning Brexit. They're positioning themselves for good trade deals after post Brexit, no matter what Brexit is. Any other comments on this one?
I would say that this is the UK's attempt to actually push the Chinese out, and they think that throwing having a money shower over these African countries is going to actually sway them out of the hands of the Chinese. And we see just this week alone, Prime Minister Xi Jinping has been all over Africa, at least 27 countries in Africa in 1 week,
Mm-hmm.
striking lifetime deals with African countries that basically isolate any other foreign competition from coming in. So the United Kingdom is really struggling to have an answer to China because they have not, as a colonial power, they have not built up any infrastructure for the Africans, but they also want to keep their tentacles inside Africa because they need to maintain European capitalism at its best, or else their days are numbered. And they know that the Chinese are encroaching on European capitalism as it stands. And
Well,
if push comes to shove, it's game over for them.
well, Mike, I was going to say further evidence to kind of back up what you're speaking to is the fact that you have this whole land expropriation thing going on in South Africa right now. So that kind of tells you sort of like what the pervading mindset is on the continent, where And this maybe more or less kind of speaks. I don't want to backtrack on it. It is related to what Prima was speaking of, though. The Chinese have given Africans they've given them a far better deal than what the Europeans have ever done. Now, could the deals be better? Sure. However, the deals themselves, what's come with it, has been far and beyond better than what the Europeans brought to them. Okay, so it's the pragmatic mindset, and just May coming in with this, after Brexit and all that, where the hell else was the UK going to pivot to? They had to go to Africa, right? So if they go to Africa now, I'll tell you like this: if you're a pragmatic African, you're like, look, we need a couple more zeros on that checkbook there, and then we can talk. You actually have the position. You have the power. If you're gonna own it, you actually have the bargaining power with the UK coming to you.
I would, you have to keep in mind that European banks, especially British banks in London, basically wash African money as well. So if the United Kingdom wanted to put sanctions on any of these countries, they could easily do that and really hurt them. However, I think with this new entire banking system going into Africa, coming out of China, is going to make things a lot more difficult for European powers to actually do business there. And I think that's where you're starting to see the shaking of the boots. I think we just saw the other day, the president of Kenya come to the White House and basically told Trump, this is what the deal is. He's asserting himself because they know where they stand, geopolitically speaking, and that's the point that I was making earlier to Preem, that this is the position that we need to take. We need to take a firm position on the global chessboard of where we stand, and this is what we stand for. And anybody who doesn't like it, can go screw.
Yeah, the only thing I got to say to this was just there was a line in here that just had me chuckling. Where is it at? Yeah, she defended the UK's aid spending in Africa, a target of criticism from some Tory saying it had worked to give millions of children and women an education and immune against deadly disease. I'm like, oh shit, are you fucking kidding me? If this is not a fucking fluff piece, I don't know what the hell is. But that's all
from the BBC.
That's all.
No, this is actually a old piece from the docket that I actually to remove.
Yes, I forgot about that one.
So the actual item that was supposed to be on the docket is actually in the group chat.
Okay, let me get on that one.
But that's what I'm saying, Preem. I mean, kind of seeing it all for what it is, right? And then making a decision based on what suits your needs.
Again, I kind of fall back, when I can't speak to something that I don't have that much knowledge on, and this stuff isn't one of those things. But just generally speaking, from a Concord level, I kind of, based on what I've seen, I kind of like that cat down there, and the Malema dude, and what he said. I don't know the whole dynamics of it, the details of it, but what he said was like, listen, we might get killed. It is what it is. They might say military. It is what it is. We might be impoverished. It is what it is. But we're going to do our own thing. So taking a whole separatist mindset, for now, and not to say not to do business with anybody, but he just takes me as a cat that's like uncompromised, that has pure and total autonomy that can't be bought.
You know what's interesting? What's interesting about that cat is that
I like
I got like last Friday. I think it was last Friday. I was on Diane Corns' hangout, and that was like one of the main topics of discussion because she's there in South Africa, and she cleared up a lot of misconceptions. Like what we're hearing in the media is that like these Afrikaners getting kicked off their lands. That's actually not the case. What the actual legislation there stipulates is that what they're doing is they're reclaiming the land because the land was never actually acquired legally, right? So they have it in possession legally. So what they're going to do is they're going to reacquire the land back. They're going to reappropriate it. And then it's like, okay, now you can go about buying it. You can lease it. You can, if you want to have some sort of sharecropper arrangement, okay, we can work that out. But that's really actually the nature of what they're doing. They're painting it as they're getting kicked off. They're like, no, we're just basically taking it back because you never acquired it legally. So there's also sort of like how it's being presented and put in Western media, to kind of shape how people are seeing it. But in all actuality, no, it's actually a legal procedure.
Yeah, and then again, I don't know if he's on the right side of right or on the wrong side of right, but to me, it doesn't make no difference. I just like him because he's a person that I see that just can't be compromised.
Well, what that dude, that dude's
I respect that.
That dude's position is that what it is that okay, they're righting a wrong, and what you have is you have like sort of like that or what you would call, I guess, your right wing Afrikaner wing, that you have like a lot of dudes, ex-military guys going there training these white farmers and stuff like that to go at war with the Africans when they come in and take the land. And so what he's saying is what he's basically saying is that, well, look, we'll y'all talking about like killing us, we're willing to die over this. We're gonna get it back one way or the other. We'll take those L's. Like if you want to, we can do this peacefully,
exactly,
or we can do it. Yeah, that's what that brother's position is. Yep,
exactly.
Well, you also see white nationalists from the United States traveling into South Africa as well to defend the farmers.
Yep.
So out of red states, especially places like Georgia.
Truth be told, they aren't just coming out of the U.S. They're flying out of Europe too as well.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying anything about Europe. I'm saying specifically United States that there has been a pledge to the Trump White House, to the Trump administration, to do something about this. So what I'm saying is, what Julius Malema is saying is that if they decide to come in here, then it is what it is, and that's been the rumor for quite some time.
Exactly. But as far as folks are going to be flying over there to defend the farmers, they're coming from all around the globe. But at the end of the day, it is what it is.
Oh no, we didn't say they're not coming from all around the globe. Well, we just know specifically that it to be true that since we're in America, they are coming from America. We're not saying they're not coming from across the globe.
No, that's what I'm saying. They're pleading to the Trump administration and his supporters to actually come into South Africa and help defend them. So what's going to happen, and what the rumor is speculated to happen, is that Trump could actually put sanctions on South Africa, or he could take a more loose approach and actually put and actually put Julius Malema and anybody who's in the EFF on the terrorist watch list, because this is how they got the ANC in the first place in the 1960s. That's why Nelson Mandela went to jail. The CIA actually put him in jail.
Which again, he just needs to play this whole thing carefully, because what he doesn't want to be is be another Obama in Libya.
Well, two things. I did hear about the tariff thing, with South Africa. I did hear something about that. The other thing too was that you only heard Trump speak to that when the whole Cohen thing went down, or when the federal charges got placed on his legal team and his campaign team. Okay, that was when you heard him speak to that, was to largely deflect from the fact that a few of the people on his team just got hit with Fed charges. Now, since that time, you ain't heard really nothing else. So I, for one, am going to question just how serious he was about it all altogether. I think that largely had to just do with the fact that, there was that whole thing with his lawyers and Cohen or Mueller or whoever the hell it was, and they got hit with the Fed charges and stuff. So I'm me personally, I'm kind of taking it with a grain of salt. You ain't really heard nothing else. Maybe saying like the last week or two.
Yeah, he definitely talks a lot. But one thing I do know about him is that he will go ahead and act, but he's got a long way to go. Again, he's got a long way to go to do what Obama did in Libya, and he just has to play it carefully because, you know, what I'm saying, for me as an individual, that's where I got lost. That's where I was done with that whole Gaddafi thing. So you know, but we'll see how it works out. We'll see how it works out.
All right, so I'll go ahead to this next next topic on the docket. This is an add-on. One momento, por favor, please. I'll share my screen here. All right. All right. This one is from the Duran, title: In a strange twist, Putin meets with Turkey's foreign minister and Turkey's intelligence chief. In this video, written by Alex Christoforo on August 28th. Russian President Vladimir Putin received Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu and Turkish Minister of Defense Hulusi Akar in the Kremlin to discuss economic cooperation issues as well as the Syrian crisis. In attendance at the meeting was the head of Turkey's National Intelligence Organization, Hakan Fidan. The meeting comes on the heels of a recent report from Russian television that asserts that the U.S. is positioning weaponry for a bombing raid to punish Syria for a soon to happen Al Qaeda White Helmets chemical weapons attack. French President Emmanuel Macron has declared during the speech to French ambassadors on Monday that France was ready to launch new strikes against Syria in case of a chemical weapons attack. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton reportedly warned Russian Secretary of the Security Council Nikolai Patrushev that Washington was prepared to take full force military action against Syria and Damascus if Damascus uses chemical weapons, stressing that America prepared is prepared to respond with greater force than before. Eva Bartlett reported to RT Bolton calls on Al Qaeda to stage more chemical attacks in Syria and said, in a move that was entirely predictable, the U.S. administration is once again threatening to bomb Syria if there's a chemical weapons attack. Via RT, quote, foreign specialists have arrived in Syria and may stage a chemical attack using chlorine in the next 2 days, the Russian Defense Military said. This will be filmed for international media to frame Damascus forces. Defense Ministry spokesman Major General Igor Kanash- Kanashenkov said the operation is planned to unfold in the village of Kafr Zita in Syria, northwestern Hama province in the next 2 days. Kanashevkov said that English-speaking specialists are already in place to use poisonous agents, while a group of residents from the north has been transported to Kafir Zita and is currently being prepared to take part in the staging of the attack and be filmed suffering the supposed chemical munitions and barrel bombs launched by the Syrian government forces. The group of residents will be used to assist fake rescuers from the white helmets. They will they will be filmed apparently suffering from the effects of chemical weapons and then be shown in the Middle Eastern and English language media. The Defense Ministry earlier warned that the US, UK, and France are preparing to use the planned attack as a pretext for airstrikes against Syria. The USS the Sullivans and Arleigh Burke class Aegis guided missile destroyer was already deployed to the Persian Gulf a couple of days ago. End quote. The Durian, the Durians, Alex, that is the person that wrote the article. Is that the end of the article, or am I miss?
It should stop at the bottom.
Okay. The Durians, Alex Christoforou, an editor in chief,
The
and
Ron.
editor. Say again.
The Ron.
Oh, the Durant. Am I reading the right paragraph? Yeah, yeah, I think I'm reading the right paragraph. An editor-in-chief, Alexander Mercouris, discussed the meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterparts, days away from Assad's liberation of Idlib, and amidst intelligence reports that claims the U.S., UK, and France have planned out a false flag chemical weapons attack in Idlib, so as to provide the cover for another illegal bombing of Damascus. Via President of Russia official website, quote, taking part in the meeting on the Russian side were Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, and Special President Representative for the Syrian settlement Alexander Lavrin, excuse me, Lavrinsky. President of Russia Vladimir Putin, colleagues, friends, I am pleased to welcome you in Moscow. I know that you have already held consultations with your Russian partners in the Foreign Ministry, the Defense Ministry, and the representatives of special services. Relations with Turkey are growing deeper and more substantive, not to mention the regular contacts with President Erdogan. I would like to speak about the deepening cooperation in the economic and on resolving a number of regional issues, including urgent ones like the Syrian crisis. Thanks to our country's efforts and the involvement of other concerned states, I mean Iran in particular, as well as our cooperation with the United Nations, European countries, and the United States, we have made significant progress towards settling the Syrian crisis. I know that you have also discussed other matters of mutual interest today. I am glad to see you and to hear your assessment of where you are now and what we have to do in the short and longer term to promote our relations. Foreign Minister Mevlut Kasuvglu, Mr. President, first of all, we would like to thank you for receiving us. Your good friend, Mr. Erdogan, sends his greetings and best regards and expects your visit to Istanbul soon. You have plans to go to a seafood restaurant. It is true that our relations on at the presidential level are very good, and this drives us to promote relations at our level as well. Today, our foreign ministers held talks. Our colleagues discussed regional issues at their respective levels. All cooperation matters were discussed. It is very important for us, not only at the state level, but in the regional context as well. In quote and end of the article. All right. What about this made you add this on the docket today, Mike?
So what it sounds like to me, and I could be wrong on this, but what it sounds like to me is that Turkey is going to work out some deals with Russia in terms of how they deal with Syria, how they deal with the Middle East, and how they deal with themselves as a global power. I think what Russia is trying to broker is a deal with Syria in the north to get rid to neutralize the Kurds as a potential threat to Turkey in exchange for the neutralization of the Kurds in the north. Turkey will leave their military bases in the north, and in exchange for those military bases in the north of Syria, you will probably see, from what I understand, is Russian air base inside Turkey, outside of Ankara,
Hmm.
which gives Russia a strategic advantage, not just in the Middle East, but actually in terms of how they deal with NATO. Because as it stands right now, I don't think that Turkey is going to be in NATO in the next couple of years. From what I saw last week, the United States has removed all its nuclear weapons inside Turkey. So they packed up all their stuff and they've left. I I can only imagine that the reason why they packed all this stuff in the first place since 2015, since Obama was in office, is because they are already planned that when Russia entered the war in Syria, that they were going to shoot down a Russian warplane. And in shooting down one of those Russian warplanes, what would the retaliation be coming back from Russia if a Turkish fighter jet actually shot it down? What would the retaliation be? And would the United States and the rest of NATO be willing to go to war based on Article 5 of NATO, that if one member is attacked, then all members must respond? Who really wants to respond for Turkey if Russia was to attack? Do you really want to start World War III over Turkey? Is it really worth it? And I think that the Americans and the British and the Germans have figured out that this is in our best interest. So we'll let Turkey shoot down the Russian fighter jet, and then if Russia retaliates, then it's on them. Too bad. There's no air defense system. There's no nuclear weapons to be had. That's just too bad for them. And now that you see Turkey has flipped, the failed coup attempt was sponsored by the United States and other NATO members, such as the United Kingdom and France, because they want to get rid of Turkey and justify why why the hostility towards Russia and why the hostility towards Turkey. So what it sounds like now is that this is a strategic effort between Turkey and Russia to actually lock up the Black Sea for themselves, as well as that South Stream pipeline coming out of Russia for gas, which solidifies their position and keeps Qatar from pushing the pipeline through Syria up through Turkey into supply Europe. That's not going to happen.
Okay. Okay. Any other? Do you have any other comments on this one?
That might be for complex.
Is there sorry you guys, I'm eating. Is there anything with regards to the tariffs that Turkey was talking about placing on US electronics? Did that have a part to play in this as well?
No. So Turkey actually does lots of business with Russia because there are a lot of Turkish nationals inside Russia who do who operate like H-1B visas in the United States. They have something similar in between Turkey and Russia, so they have those sort of agreements. Then you take into consideration what the tourism packages have in terms of the economy. That's $1 billion economy between Turkey and Russia. So there are significant efforts to solidify these areas of business and of economics between the two powers, as well as military agreements as well. So if Russia does get the military base there, we already know that they sold the S-400 to Turkey, and Turkey has already commented this week that should be here by next year, by late next year, early 2020. That sort of business is what they're focusing on. When you have a military intelligence officer or head of intelligence of a state meeting with the president of a global power, that means that something big is about to happen.
Right.
You don't send Mike Pompeo up to Moscow, to have Big Newtons and Ovaltine. That just doesn't happen. That means that they're talking about something major.
I follow.
All right. We have 2 more points on the docket tonight, and then we're going to open up this open mic session. All right. Next article on the docket comes from comes from AlJazeera.com. Title: French President Macron: Europe cannot depend on U.S. for security. Trump's aggressive isolationism means U.S. appears to be turning his back on shared history, French president says. All right. Written August 27th, Article: The European Union must stop depending on the United States for security and must now rely on its own military forces for protection, France's President Emmanuel Macron said. In a speech to French ambassadors on Monday, Macron said he would put forward new proposals to the EU to boost security and that all European nations, including Russia, should be involved in discussions on defense cooperation. Europe cannot rely on the United States only for its security, he said. It is up to us to meet our responsibilities and guarantee our security. Since his election in May 2017, the 40-year-old leader has campaigned for a more integrated EU with a common defense budget and security doctrine. During the speech, Macron said cooperation with Russia should occur on the condition that progress is made with Moscow on the fighting in eastern Ukraine. Perry is pushing for full implementation of the 2015 Minsk peace agreement that was sponsored by France and Germany to settle the conflict in Ukraine, which has killed at least 10,000 people since 2014. In November, EU countries launched an unprecedented program of joint military investment aimed at confronting EU security challenges. 23 of the 28 member states signed up to the plan, turning its back. Macron called on Europe to be a trade and economic power that defends its strategic interests and financial independence with tools that can fend off U.S. extraterritorial sanctions. Multilateralism is going through a major crisis which collides with all our diplomatic activity, above all because of U.S. policy, he said. Macron also criticized U.S. President Donald Trump's aggressive isolationism, with the partner with whom Europe built the post-World War order appears to be turning its back on this shared history, the French president said. In our neighborhood. Meanwhile, Germany's foreign minister said on Monday that European nations must fill the gaps left by the withdrawal of the U.S. from international organizations and key regions of the world. Heiko Maas told German diplomats to Berlin that Europe should increase its political and financial weight at the United Nations, that the World Trade Organization, both of which have come under pressure from Washington since Trump took office last year. He also urged Europe to step up its activities in the Middle East, Africa, and Western Balkans, warning that the cost of war, poverty, and displacement in our neighborhood is borne by us Europeans. Moss said, while Europe should seek to rebalance its relationship with Washington, the goal is never Europe first. All right. In that last paragraph, did he just say what I thought he said? He said that, what was it? That poverty is Europe's fault. Okay, he also urged Europe to step up its activities in the Middle East, Africa, and Western Balkans, warning that the cost of war, poverty, and displacement in our neighborhood is borne by us Europeans. Sounds like he's admitting that these areas of the world is because of Europeans.
I think he's talking about policies coming out of Brussels. So he's saying that the policies of capitalism has actually caused more poverty than what's to be imagined, right? Coming out of Europe. He's thinking more from a liberal standpoint. Um, this article, the reason why I sent this article is because it, Europe is looking to get away from the United States because they've been colonized by the United States since World War II. So anything that would allow them to get from under the tentacles of Washington D.C. and Wall Street is a plus sign that they see for themselves, and because they want to do business in Iran, the sanctions that the United States is threatened to put, or the Trump administration is threatened to put on these European companies like Airbus and Total and Peugeot and Volkswagen, that's unacceptable to the Europeans. That they should suffer because of United States policies, and that everybody else is suffering because of Europe's policies. And maybe we should take it. And if we're gonna actually assert ourselves, we have to lead by example, and that means by admitting that we got this wrong in terms of how we do business, in terms of dealing with
Mm.
poverty. Um, I foresee that Europe is either going to break up or it's going to restructure itself, where France and Germany is actually going to try to form a bond together, to stay afloat. Because if their economies come crashing down. You know, it could be the end of the European Union in a catastrophic way that is worse than what happened to the Soviet Union with the collapse of the Berlin Wall.
Mm. Any other points? Anyone else?
Oh no.
All right, let's get to our last article
To
before we
answer
Mhm.
Ulysses' point question earlier about did Turkey discuss anything about electronics tariffs on American goods? Um, they're actually working with the Russians on their own Google search engine style product. So that was one of the reasons why they went to why they had the meeting,
Okay.
because they plan on getting away from anything that has to do with Silicon Valley for the most part.
Yeah, that was why I asked that question, man. Because when I heard about it, that was basically the sentiment. They were like basically anything tech altogether related to any sort of U.S. entity they're cutting ties with. And like it largely had to do with this new pact that they were going to be making with Russia with regards to technology development.
Yeah, and I think they're going to lean more on Samsung for most of their projects going forward, or most of their products going forward, which is going to boost South Korea's revenue through the roof, because uh, they can essentially push all types of exclusive products just for that region
And
and
it's
charge
funny you
charge
mentioned
up the
that.
wazoo.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's funny you mentioned that because when they talked about this, they specifically mentioned Apple as somebody like that would take like one of the hardest hits from all of this.
They would, because Apple is pretty strong in most of those
Yep.
G20 nations, right? So
Yep.
um, i- if you're not using Windows, you're using a Mac, and for the most part, from what I saw, even in the African Union, there's a lot of Macs being used, a lot of MacBooks, and a lot of iMacs being used. So that part of the world seems to value proprietary gadgets, and in this instance, Apple would definitely take a blow because they have a lot of they have a big launch in those regions, and that's where all their those are two wealthy regions, Russia and Turkey. So
And
especially
they would
Turkey,
take
because Turkey interfaces with Europe.
and they would take that L to Samsung. That's the main part.
Oh, there's not much Tim Cook can actually do, right? He already got his concessions to bring back, the tax revenue that was coming out of Ireland, that was stuck inside Ireland in some of these offshore accounts, to bring it back tax free into the United States. So I
Wait,
think I think
so
he
what are
already
they going to
started his
do?
load.
What are they going to do with that? With that
They
money?
put it in
Is that is
investment.
that is that is that going to the Foxconn factory in Wisconsin?
Maybe it could
Hmm.
very well be.
Okay.
But I
Interesting.
don't see that lasting long. I don't see that lasting long. I could see that facility maybe lasting maybe one cycle of product development, or maybe two cycles of product development, and then shifting their load into shifting their fabrication into Mexico.
Wow. Wow.
All right, we got one more article, then we're going to open it up for open mic. This one comes from AlJazeera.com, titled Colombia to withdraw from Pan South American UNICEF bloc. Duque says the group of South American states act like an accomplice to the Venezuelan dictatorship, written on August 28th. Article: Colombian President Ivan Duque has announced his country's withdrawal from the Union of South American Nations, or UNICEF, a bloc set up a bloc set up a decade ago to counter U.S. influence in the region. Duque said the group acted as an accomplice to the Venezuelan dictatorship, and said the movie and said the move will be completed in 6 months. This announcement follows a decision by Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Peru, and Paraguay in April to temporarily suspend their membership of the organization. The 12-member bloc was created in 2008 to promote regional integration. The late Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez and other South American leaders opposed U.S.-backed proposals for a free trade area of the Americas and insisted upon and instead set up UNICEF to help move their countries towards an economic and political union. Before Colombia reannounced its membership, Bolivia urged Duque to reconsider its position. The remaining members are Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, Uruguay, Guyana, and Suriname. Venezuela's crisis. Excuse me, according to the UN, 1.6 million Venezuelans have fled the country since 2015, with 90% going to countries within South America. Colombia has granted 800,000 of them temporary residence, but many want to travel onwards to Peru, Chile, or even Argentina, which has taken in more than 30,000 Venezuelans. Duque, Duque has said all diplomatic approaches should be used to isolate the regime in Venezuela. The most important thing at this moment is that if the dictatorship does not end, the migration will not stop, he told the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, News in an interview last week. Governments initially welcomed the migrants with open arms due to Venezuela's role in welcoming those fleeing dictatorships and conflicts in the past. But the exodus has ballooned this year, stretching social services, creating more competition for low-skilled jobs, and stoking fears of unrest. In the past 2 weeks, both Ecuador and Peru announced tighter entry rules for Venezuelans, requiring Venezuelans to carry valid passports instead of just national ID cards. All right. My opinion with this on Colombia saying they want to leave UNICEF is due to them joining NATO and that membership with NATO, they are beholden to doing whatever NATO say, and this is just one thing. So if they leave the South American bloc and join, and now they're with NATO, and they go into a conflict with Venezuela, since they're not a part of this South American bloc, other South American members in that UNICEF doesn't have anything to do with that type of conflict. And the people that are left over in the UNICEF are weaker countries so far. So to me, I see this as a coming escalation between Colombia and Venezuela.
Not just Venezuela, but Ecuador as well. All these countries share borders with each other. It'll be great if you could pull up a map on Google Maps or Google Earth to show people how the proximity of these nations. Um, Colombia is actually being controlled out of SOCOM in Washington D.C. If you look at some of their political figures, they're actually in and out of Washington D.C. on a weekly basis for the last maybe 5 or 6 years. So this has been something that's been in the works for quite some time. Um,
Yeah,
high probability that Colombia decides to really flip, that they'll probably start requesting nuclear weapons or something to that
mhm.
effect to defend themselves because they're living in a bad neighborhood, so to speak. We also know that Israel has been working closely with Colombia and training their military as well as delivering military hardware to them.
Now, for people to understand these countries, if you don't already know, of course, you know Brazil. This is the largest land area. Brazil controls the largest land area in South America, but you have Colombia here at the northwestern edge. Then you have Venezuela to its east, Ecuador to its west, southwest. You have Peru under there. But then back to Venezuela, you also have Guyana, Suriname, and French Guyana. Then in the landlocked countries, you have Bolivia, Paraguay. and they're right up under Brazil. Then you have Chile that runs down the spine, well, the back of South America, then Argentina and Uruguay. So to give the people where they are listening to this a visual of the countries we just discussed in the last article. And Colombia shares a border with Venezuela. And this is open mic.
Yeah, down there on the ground, I mean, it's just been a complete total shit show. I mean, I get that from my lady pal that's down there in Colombia, and on the coast over there in Barranquilla. I think that's how you pronounce it. And the homies in Medellin. I mean, the homies like it because to be respectful of this show, it's a lot more talent coming up that way. But you got, I mean, yeah, you got, I mean, folks are paying hotels and sleeping in the hallways there in Medellin, and my lady friend saying as far as the economic thing is that yeah, they're definitely coming in and they're taking up a lot of the jobs that the entry level jobs that are there because they're willing to do it for pretty much nothing. I think I saw a video. Well, no, not I think I know I saw a video. Like about 2 weeks ago, there was this border town of Venezuela on Brazil, and the Brazilians were like, the Venezuelans were like coming down a hill to come into from Venezuela into Brazil, and like the towners were there. They had stones, they had rakes, they had bats, they had stuff, and they were like saying, you don't come over, you know what I'm saying, because the border is not really protected, to go ahead and keep them out. So. But she said it's absolutely having an impact on at a lot of the transit stations. Fortunately, it's not like getting like unhygienic and like crimes or rapes and things of that nature. But because they're all, I guess they see each other as like one people. But it's pretty bad down there. It's really bad down there. And then I'm not sure if you're gonna talk about it this time or next time, or if it's even a big issue. But something happened this week with Argentina's peso or something. They got the inflation of it got like skyrocketed, so they got issues going on. But maybe not on the same courses as Venezuela. But back to the topic, the Venezuela thing, yeah, is definitely bleeding over into those countries. So I'm not sure if it's not a UNESCO, but whatever that NATO thing or whatever you said, but. Yeah, I mean, it's bad, bro. It's bad. It's bad for the regular people, for the indigenous people in those countries, in Colombia. It's bad. But the brothers love it. The brothers love it. The brothers are loving it down
Yeah,
there.
a part of this issue is that the United States has put sanctions on Venezuela, so that has really hurt the economy and has hurt their ability to maintain and redistribute wealth. So if people can't have access to the ATMs, because that's what's happening right now, they can't get access to the ATMs. What's going to happen is they're going to have to use whatever money they have to buy the goods off the shelf, such as your milk, eggs, and butter and things of that nature. And they're going to take it into Colombia and sell it for U.S. dollars in order to avoid capital flight. And I believe I mentioned this several times before. So what's happening to Venezuela is that it's spiraling out of control because of the sanctions that the United States has put on it. But we see how effective it is. The problem when people judge Venezuela's socialist system is they're judging it from where it is right now and not where it would be if it did not have these sanctions on it. But what this is going to do to Venezuela is going to force Venezuela to become just like North Korea, where they start manufacturing and making their own stuff, including ballistic missile systems as well as nuclear technology. For a country like North Korea to go through 70 years of sanctions and still be resilient enough to actually manufacture defense capabilities says a lot. They're pretty much isolated from the market. I don't think they've ever been a part of the SWIFT system or the Bretton Woods system for that matter, because they've been at war for the last 65 to 70 years. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that it would be disingenuous for us to actually to look at Venezuela from that position and say, well, the country sucks and it's out of control, and that's why socialism sucks, and that's why we shouldn't adopt it for ourselves. And in reality, the socialist policies has actually lifted people out of poverty in Venezuela into a better position, but that growth has been stunted. By the United States meddling into their domestic affairs. We see the same thing in Cuba with the sanctions put on Cuba all this time since 1959, and we still see Cuba cranking out doctors, like we crank out football and basketball players. Except their human capital is being used to help solve most of the world's issues, including HIV, which they were the first ones to come up with the cure for.
Well, hell, I think they were also one of the first countries to come up with one of the more effective non-invasive treatments of cancer as well.
Mm-hmm. So can any type of system sustain sanctions, or is it just a socialist system that goes to shit if it gets sanctioned?
No, wait, say that again.
The banking system. I think what Preem is asking is, can any of these economic systems that the nation states put in place, can they avoid being under sanctions? And as long as your money flows to Wall Street, Brussels, and London, there is no real way to get around that other than going to a more cryptocurrency, more bilateral agreements over something like a blockchain. That's why these technologies are so important and so vital to these other countries, because it allows them to divorce themselves from the traditional Swiss system that has been in place coming out of Europe.
So I'm not sure how long, but I know I've heard that we slapped sanctions on Iran and Russia and whatever, but they are crumbling. So but those aren't capitalist systems, are they? Are those, what type of systems are those?
The mechanisms of how these countries deal. The mechanisms of how these countries deal with it, Wall Street is from a capitalist standpoint. Even China is a capitalist economy, but they are a politically communist society. So in most of Africa, if not all of Africa, is a stronghold for communism, from politically speaking, which is why there's so many civil wars and things like that. Whoever controls the resources for that matter. The same thing happens even on the micro scale. When you think about microeconomies on the ground, your panhandlers and everything like that. Those little small economies are actually very one-to-one capitalist style economies, but at the same time, the total infrastructure of the country itself is socialist, where you have access to high quality healthcare as a human right. You have access to high education. This is how Cuba was able to crank out so many doctors and have very few infant mortality rates and longer life expectancy. People live to be 80, 90 years old, such as what's his face that just passed away. You guys know the president of Cuba.
Castro.
Yeah, Castro. Thank you. So Castro, despite the fact that he smoked cigars, he lived to be 90 years old, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like the life expectancy has increased since they've taken power, but at the same time, you don't get to see the fruits of their benefits because the United States put sanctions on them.
Yeah. We could go deep in the weeds as far as that two word term as far as human right. Everybody has access to healthcare, but when you put that label of human right on it, then everything becomes a human right. Education becomes a human right. Housing becomes a human right, and then you go down a deep spiraling hole, that knows no end to it, and you gotta fund it. And again, it's all good if you run out of other people's money, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, when you talk about human rights, right? When I speak about human rights, I'm speaking about things that are sustainable for a human being to survive off of, right? So you need access to high quality healthcare. If you were in the United States and you needed access to chemotherapy or something like that, under this system, because it's such a hyper capitalist system, you may not get seen at those doctors. You may get turned down. You may not have access to good prescriptions because the cost is so astronomical, right? But if you go to Canada, you may get the same prescription for $10. You have to ask yourself how much of capitalism is necessary, for your society to function.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I don't think it's a capitalist issue, but just speaking for me personally, I would much rather have access to good, healthy, organically grown food than have access to a chemotherapy doctor. You know what I'm saying? And that's the way that I've kind of played the game. You know what I'm saying? For myself, for about close to like the last decade. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather have access to nuts and seeds and chlorophyll and spirulina and stuff like that than have access to someone that can get rid of, gout in my foot. And when I'm in my 30s, you shouldn't have gout in your feet unless you're living like a rich lifestyle. So I'd rather have access to information that tells me how to live healthy so I don't have to buy cleansers. So every day I'm cleansing myself naturally and I got pipes like a baby, you know what I'm saying? Because I have that access to that information rather than have access to a doctor because I've had all this Coca-Cola stickers and all that other stuff. But again, to each his own. I can't speak to someone else what someone else wants to go ahead and indulge in, but I'd rather have access to healthy, clean, good living, and the information that's going to teach me how to do that and the food that's going to allow me to do that than have access to a doctor when it's pretty much too late.
Well, let's examine your point then, right? Steve Jobs was a multimillionaire. And he had access to clean, healthy food, and he still got cancer. And he tried to treat it through eating the products that you just mentioned, and that did not help.
Wait, did you said Steve Jobs?
Yeah, but admittedly, I mean, there are folks that can do everything right. I mean, it's life. Say love bees. Shit happens. But truth be told, I mean, Steve also admitted that he kind of downed a bunch of mushrooms and psychedelic drugs and this stuff. I'm not sure that compromises his immune system or whatever, but you can do things right and get hit by a bus. You know what I'm saying? I mean, healthy people will get hit by a bus and get ready. It happens. But again, I'm just speaking for me. I'm just speaking for me.
But when we talk about human rights, right, we're talking about what happens in predominantly black areas when, you're in places like Chicago where they close 50 public schools, and where do you think these kids are going to go to get a decent education to alleviate themselves from the poverty at the end? We know, statistically speaking, and evidence has shown over the last 50 to 75 years that access to higher education allows access to the middle class. But when you take that away from one group of people and you give it to another group of people, like they did in Chicago, a lot of the school funding that would have went to predominantly black schools actually went to predominantly white schools that didn't even need it. And that's why you have a bunch of drill music terrorists running around Chicago, angry because they don't have access to a better lifestyle.
And all the schools in their neighborhoods they've all been defunded and shut down. I mean, I think it was to the tune of, it was like 52 schools. I'm trying to remember. All got shut down across Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah, but then if you look at like the APS Atlanta Public Schools, we had that scandal down here about 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, they had the schools, they had the money, kids had iPads, but what you had was teachers go ahead and having parties to go ahead and dock up grades so they can go ahead and get the bonuses, for passing kids through high school who couldn't even barely even read. I mean, the whole system needs to be gutted because it was all correct. I mean, it's flawed. It's not working. I mean, to your point and to mine. To your point, they don't have access to it, I guess. But to mine, the point is, even when they do have access, they aren't really getting nothing out of it because the culture, the behavior, and the values just aren't there as a whole. Not everyone, but, what I'm saying? I would say a majority, and most is more than 50%, as the old man says. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, it primarily comes down to behavior. You can get yourself a high school education without being in high school. There's a library somewhere close to you on the bus route, and you can go ahead and find the information there. You can get yourself a college equivalent education because there's a free library that has the tools there. I mean, you've also pushed out those are courses that guys can take and folks can take and get themselves certifications to go ahead and make six figures. So the options are there, but at the end of the day, it boils down to the individual and their behavior and what they value, and if they're gonna go ahead and take the initiative to take advantage of those things. I mean, you can dress a turd up in a tuxedo, but at the end of the day, it's still shit.
Well, so you would have access to a public library, but having access to a public library doesn't really make any sense if you don't have the reading literacy available at your disposal. And a lot of what we see in Chicago is because people are reading on third grade level or less, right? A lot of these black boys are reading at below fifth grade level. So that if you can't even read a newspaper, you're definitely not going to be able to study for an exam. So it doesn't make any sense to actually suggest that, at least from my interpretation of what you're saying. So,
and again, I might be a little bit biased because I'm sorry.
Now, I was just going to say that education does become a human right at that point if you want them to get out of their position and have class mobility. You can't have class mobility if you take away their ability to even read.
At the end of the day, you can't want something for somebody. You can't want something more for somebody than they want for themselves. That is tried and true. And again, I may be biased, but I had two partners that was actually knee deep in the public school system. They were educators, and they went in there with the whole kumbaya and the whole altruistic view. But they was down there. It took them a couple of years. It took them about 8 years, and they said, you know what? It's just they just don't care. They just don't care. They just don't have to. They just don't value it. You can lead a camel to water, but you can't make them drink. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, if someone wants something bad enough, they will gut through a wall with a razor blade if they want it bad enough. And you just don't see that. You just don't see that. You just don't see the desire that they want or that they value that. You know what I'm saying? But you see the people who are pushing it, they value that more than the people who they're actually pushing it for. You can't want something more for somebody else. I mean, but again, to each his own. To each his own. I respect that.
Ulysses, you were going to say something?
Oh, no, I'm listening.
Well, right, and just to reiterate my point that these things that we use for life sustainability does become a human right. If one person has access to a hospital and I don't, then that becomes a problem, right? So if I have to go to the emergency room while this other person gets to see a high-end doctor, then you have discrepancy in how people have access to proper health care to survive. You're charging them up the wazoo to go to the ER, but then the other guy, who doesn't look like me and doesn't share the same ethnicity as me, has access to better health care. You see this in New York with Jewish hospitals versus non-Jewish patients. So people are being screwed over for a better better human rights conditions. Gentrifying a community is a human rights violation. You're basically internally displacing people based on a corrupt system that is supposed to be capitalist in its nature, but is actually backsliding, politically. That's not fair. That's unjust.
Well, no. I mean, I don't see this. I mean, I don't see this that because I look at it from both sides of it. Is that I mean, if I have an issue, if I had Crohn's or if I have cancer or whatever, and for me, if I'm lower income and I have access to this pill, because I'm lower income and it may have a bunch of side effects, but you may have access to a different pill that may cost you $10,000 a month, but it doesn't have all the side effects. But some pharmaceutical company, they say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and invest these billions of dollars, and we're going to come up with a pill. We may not be able to go broad market, but there's some individuals that may have this discretionary $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month to go ahead and take this pill that could kind of eliminate their symptoms without giving them the side effects. And we're going to make it available to that market. It's cool. Same thing. Transportation. If for me to get from point A to point B, for me to get in my job requires me to spend $2.25 on a bus, I'm still getting from where I'm living to my job. For to get from point A to point B, it may cost you may be able to get a $225,000 car. You know what I'm saying? But you're still getting to that place. Now, can we knock the company that says, hey, listen, we're going to make a means of transportation for the individual who can afford a $250,000 ride? You know what I'm saying? Or the person, or the county who says we're going to make a means of transportation for the individual who can only afford a $2.25 bus token. We're still getting transportation. I don't think the company that's providing that $250,000 ride should somehow make it available to me. I mean, I don't, again, I'm able to get from point A to point B. I may not be able to get there as fast or as fly, but I'm still getting it. To me, I'm okay with that. Just don't leave me on the side of the road with no transportation. And nobody in this country, if they break a leg, cannot walk into a hospital and get seen. So everybody can't get seen. They may not be able to get seen by the best at Cedar Sinai or whatever, or the Cleveland Clinic or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But they can't get seen.
I just want to answer Yada's question in the chat. What's the incentive for a Pookie to want to become a complex design or Mike V? All the reward is in thugging. Depends on what the reward is. Is it a long-term reward or a short-term reward, and what is that reward? I guess if it's instant gratification, then that reward is going to be short-term. Instant gratification could be a variety of things, and I won't go into it right now. The long-term would be, I don't know. I can't be specific about it because you're not specific in your question. So
she said, "What's the what? Wait, what's the incentive to become someone like myself? Or you, all the wars and thugging?" Well, I mean, I think maybe Mike can speak to this. I'll speak for myself, and then Mike can kind of maybe follow up on it. I only do what my own impetus, kind of suggests that I do, and that's not necessarily the things that Thuggo and those guys do. You know what I mean? So what we have very different interests, and and maybe kind of what drives us are completely different things. So we don't even think along the same lines. So I mean, that's maybe kind of largely how we can kind of maybe give that some explanation. It's not something where you kind of put us in the same box. It really isn't.
Well, I know a box that I would like to put Pookie in, but I'll save that for another time. But yeah, I mean, in the Black community, there would be no incentive for them to become a complex or a Mike V, right? Who's rewarding them for this? When you see certain women rewarding these guys with not just instant gratification, but children that they expect, the likes of the Brain Trust to actually come out there and support through mentorship and other financial means. And they consider that if you don't do that, then you're not on code, so to speak, by their terms. So there is no incentive for them to become us at this point. But with the fourth industrial revolution, there will be much need and much necessity for them to actually become us and actually subscribe to this channel, if they knew better.
Yeah.
Either way, I'm quite all right with them not subscribing as well, because just means more for the taking for us. Coming soon. So was that an agreement by barking?
No, that was the little dogs over here.
Okay.
But no. I mean, that I agree with that sentiment, though. I mean, there really is no incentive for us to sort of deduce ourselves or devolve, on that level. And there's all the incentive for them to actually kind of, adopt some of the more forward-thinking 21st century concepts. There's no benefit in us regressing.
and they don't see any benefit to themselves progressing as well. So, um, at least to our measure, right? So, I mean, geopolitically speaking, because this is a geopolitical hangout, if you can't speak a second language or even write a second language, even in terms of computer skills, if you're not working on Python or C++ or C sharp or something to that effect, or you can't speak Spanish and you can't speak Mandarin or even Russian for that matter, you're soiled. If you're definitely not going to be recognized on the international stage. I met a brother at the airport a few years ago when I was traveling, and he spoke Japanese fluently. And the ability to have ability for a brother like him to walk into an environment and just into Tokyo or something like that, and just basically speak the native tongue and broker deals. That's huge. That's mega.
Yeah, I got 3 close homies that can actually speak like fluent Japanese, man. It's crazy. All brothers.
Hmm. You become an ambassador, on behalf of what you consider to be the black community.
I've got to learn Spanish in 2019. Good God, I got to.
I just need to step mine up, man. I've been learning Spanish since I was a kid, so I can speak it. Like I can speak it, but it's not conversational. That's like the level you need it to where you're going to do business. You have to have it, on a level of being formal and conversational.
Man, I'm like basement level. I'm strictly Google Translate. I'm actually waiting for these doggone tech guys to create something I can plug in my ear. You know what I'm saying? So everything that comes in gets instantly translated. And
they already have that.
I actually saw something like that, but it looked like one of them cell phones from 1982. It was huge.
No.
No.
No, it's an app. There's an app. That actually does that for you. I think even the iPhone would actually, if you take a picture of something, it will actually translate it from that native language to English.
No, but I'm talking about like something I can plug in my ear, so when people are talking in Spanish, it will like the auto talk whatever would say it in English to me.
Dude, there's literally I want to say.
You're talking about Google Duplex. So Google Duplex actually does that.
Google Duplex.
Yeah, that's what it is. Sorry, this dog's here.
Huh. Okay.
I was going to say, I think there's a few apps that do that, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe China. I think we talked about this on one of the space and technology hangouts. That even in China, that the robots, when you speak to them in English, they actually translate it into Mandarin and can actually interpret whether or not you're speaking Mandarin or in English, which is phenomenal, because before that was never really the case. You had to actually type things in, but you can actually speak to a robot in English and they understand it in Mandarin and actually give you back a response in English.
Nice.
And even from a marketing perspective, I think that would be even huge, right? The ability to determine whether or not it's the ethnicity of the person and the linguistics of that person, and you can actually switch the advertisement per ethnicity, per language, per linguistic of the environment. I think that would be huge too.
I like that. Yeah. Good stuff.
But Lionel, do you have anything?
Nope, I do not have anything. Anything else? Nope.
I think we can close out.
All right. Don't forget to come back. Ulysses, are you all doing anything this weekend?
I think Ulysses stepped away.
Oh wait, no, I'm here. No. We're gonna reconvene next week. Noah's got a couple of job interviews and stuff like that he's got going on, and I've been hectic. Things have been hectic on my side with Bird. But I do want to do a special clutch hangout. I do want to kind of talk about the micro sharing platform that's exploding, bike share and scooter sharing. Man, we got to talk about this, dude. This is like extremely big revenue generator. Uber is even pivoting towards this after seeing what Bird is, companies like Bird is pulling in. So yeah, we're gonna reconvene for next weekend.
Mhm. All right, so you heard it there, folks. Next weekend, um, Business with Power will reconvene. Don't forget to come back here Monday for Space and Technology. Monday is September 3rd, Space and Technology. With that said, thank you all for joining us this Saturday for a special broadcast. Talk to y'all later.